I didn't think to go back and read. So this is going to be an off the cuff, Doug. You don't know what I'm going to say. You might be a little afraid. Doug and I met, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 months ago. We are both members of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and we were at a workshop together in Toronto, and I just started to hear him talk with passion about UN, and I thought, what a cool guy this is. And then we kind of friended each other on Facebook, and I started to watch some of the interesting things that he was up to. And I don't know if I posted something along the way, but Doug commented on it, and he knows somebody from our district very well. And I don't know if that's Brian or who it is. And right away, I said, wow, you know, I'm just a brand new Rotary member also. And one of the great things that I've chosen to do is to look at programming in the sense of who's really cool that I might be interested in hearing, and others as well. So when I heard of Doug's work, I just thought I'd reach out, and he so kindly, especially in his busy schedule, said, yeah, he'd be happy to do this. So other than that, I'll let Doug fill in details as far as his involvement in Rotary and some of the other activities, but I'm really looking forward to this presentation tonight. So thank you, Doug, so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. You alluded to the United Nations, and does anybody know why Rotary is involved with the United Nations? It's because 49 Rotarians helped establish the United Nations in 1945. And that's the reason why Rotary has official status, is because we helped create it. In fact, it was 3 Rotarians who negotiated the land deal for the UN headquarters property in New York City. So we have deep roots with the United Nations, and thus we have United Nations ambassadors for Rotary in every UN facility around the world. And so that's the reason why UN and Rotary have a partnership, is because it was Rotarians who helped set it up originally. So that's not on the topic I was asked to speak on, but since you mentioned the UN, Laurie, I just thought I'd share that, because very few people know that, and even a lot of Rotarians don't realize that you are in an organization that helped create the United Nations. So there's a whole bunch more to that history that I don't have time for now, but essentially that's why we're connected with official status there. On to Belize. Back last winter, my wife Grace and I were in Belize. I have a relationship with law enforcement through my role as a former police commissioner and recently retired federal community policing advisor for the RCMP. So I had 2 areas of interest that people knew about, and thus scheduled us to go there. And this is on the right-hand side, this is the Consul General of Peru, who's a Rotarian. He's on the board of directors of the prison. The man there in the guard's uniform is the chief of security guards at the Belize prison. This is just driving through Belize City. It's right on the water. And I only show this because, you know, when we think of those Central American countries, we think dirty, shabby, and yet it's not that way. It was very clean, very neat and tidy. And at least in the areas we were, the housing was reasonably good, except for the poor areas that you might go to. But just to show you that it is a very picturesque, beautiful city to be in. Driving outside of the city, you of course come to the prison, and it's not unnormal to see the high wired fences and the guards towers and that sort of thing. So this is just entering the prison. As I mentioned, those are some of the guides. This is a very interesting door with the wood carvings, and I'll talk to that later. And they do things entirely different there. The Rotarians took this facility over under contract with the federal government, and at the time it had 900 inmates sleeping in 300 beds. And so Rotary took it over as a management contract to the government, and they do a lot of things different. The first thing they do is the warden is not called the warden, he's called the CEO, like we would see in a business. And I'll tell you a little bit about the carving of his office door in just a few minutes. This is still the CEO or the warden giving us a recap of how things have gone since Rotary took over, explaining the concepts. And basically, if you just think of a big adult life skills training center, that's what this thing has been turned into. They now have 1,275 inmates, all sleeping in their own bed, and I'll show you how they've done that. So basically, they're there to educate and rehabilitate rather than to penalize. So they're trying to get changes in their life, and hopefully when they're released, they'll have a more positive attitude and outlook and not come back as reoffenders. This is the picture they gave us of when they when the Rotarians took over, and the photos we saw was pretty much like a pigsty, but you can imagine the stress and the tension in a room of 6 people just sleeping on the floor like this. It wouldn't be a very good environment, I don't think. Certainly I wouldn't want to be in it. They've partnered actually with the Kolb Foundation, and while this is not a religious or political affiliation in any way, back in the early days, there were some priests and sisters who started this. They've since gone on to do other things, and the Kolb Foundation, though, is used to help with some fundraising and tax planning. And while religion is offered to the inmates, it's totally voluntary, it's non-denominational. They don't push it down anybody's throat, but they do have some religious programs there if the inmates choose to take advantage of it. Some of the programs are to address the educational deficiencies. They have programs to deal with the addictive behaviors, criminal behaviors, and antisocial behaviors. I'll give you some examples of those in a minute, but essentially they've taken the 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous program and they offer that. They've taken and designed a similar program for drug addiction to try and help those people who are dealing with drugs. And then they also have a program for criminal thinking. And they talk to them in terms of, you know, what were you thinking when you did this? How do you think you made the person feel that you did it to? And they try and get them to change their behavioral thinking. There are a lot of positive quotations up on the walls in murals. Nelson Mandela's are often seen in the walls of the prison. So they really, really do work on the positive attitude and focus on positive thinking for all of the inmate. And also they have programs to try and improve the anti-social behaviors. Any questions so far? Comments? Okay, this is the facility, approximately 250 acres, and you can see the various buildings. So there's one building is for youth, another building is for females, another building is for the inmates who are not serious offenders. Of course, many of them are actually immigration offenders who have tried to sneak into Belize from Guatemala or Honduras because Belize is seen to have a better standard of living. So many of them are immigrant inmates who have been caught trying to steal or smuggle across the border. And then the fourth variation or version of building is for the bad, you know, the thugs, the murderers, the killers, and that sort of thing. So they keep them all at one facility, but they're all in separate building complexes. They also have many other buildings, and I'll show you a few of those in a moment. So the warden and Pierre, the Consul General from Peru, took us for a walk. The way this is organized now by Rotary is there's a board of governors of 13. 9 of those board members are Rotarians. The other 4 are government of Belize officials. So there's no doubt that Rotarians truly do run and manage and control this operation. 2 of the Rotarians, the big fellow, the dark fellow, is Consul General Peru, Also, the congen of friends was there with us at the same time. She happens to be president of the Belize City Rotary Club at the present time. So we were taken on a tour of the prison. Inside the prison, at no time did we feel unsafe. The prisoners were all very, very polite to us. This is one of the buildings that I talked about where the youth are kept, and the other ones are very similar in nature. Very open due to the climate, and whenever the inmates go in or out of a facility or a building, they're all subject to a search, their pat-down search, because the biggest problem that they have there, it's not the programming, it's not the education, or it's not the budget. The biggest problem is the contraband. In fact, when I asked the warden what his biggest challenge there was, he said it was to prevent the guards from being corrupted. Because he said what happens is a cell phone apparently is very powerful tool to have inside a prison, because you can continue to run your corrupt activities if you've got a cell phone. Of course, guns and knives are also of interest. But he said sometimes what happens is an outside criminal, a friend of someone who's inside, will drop a bag at guard's home some night on the front porch with a note in it, and it'll have enough money equivalent of, say, a month's pay. Just say, oh, by the way, deliver this cell phone to cell block 32A tomorrow. And so when a guy's going to pick up a month's worth of wages just by delivering a phone to a prisoner, he said it's really hard sometimes to enforce that sort of corruption on the part of the guards. I thought that was kind of an interesting and a unique problem that you wouldn't think they would have there, but he said that's his biggest problem. Any questions or comments? Okay, we're out walking now, and this is the walkways between two of the divisions. The one on the left is the bad buggers area, and thus there's two fences there, and the pathway we would walk down protects us from that. So this is where the worst of the worst are kept, and you'll notice that it looks much like a kind of a small town motel, and the prison doors face the outside. So those are the bar doors, similar to what you'd see in a motel. And so the prisoners can stand and look out the doors, and of course when we walked by they were yelling and whistling at my wife, who happened to wear shorts that day. And so they get lots of fresh air. They can look out and see the countryside. And there's a reminder there. Does anybody have any idea what that big, tall structure is at the right-hand end of the facility? Any thoughts?
Is that a church or a place to pray?
You might pray there, but it's actually the gallows.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the worst area, and we continue on to this area. Now they have their own kitchen there, their own bakery, and all the inmates are taught to cook or to run the bakery, and they don't have a lot of overhead expense to pay trainers. They determine what skills that each inmate has, and then they get that inmate to get to work and teach the other inmate his skills. So this young inmate is on the way from the kitchen with soup, and he's going to one of the dining room areas. This is another wheelbarrow, and we smelled a really good aroma. And so we stopped this inmate, and we felt the tin box, and it was warm. So he opened it up for us, and they had homemade rolls in there, like homemade bread. So we were able to try some. It was really, really good. And by the way, when we went to leave, the warden had got them to bag up a couple dozen for us to take with us. So it's just amazing what they're doing there. But all the inmates, it's kind of like a self-help system at the same time as teaching them their skills. These are some of the inmates at the kitchen, and you'll see that one younger guy has a shovel that at one point would have been an aluminum shovel, but it's been wore down. And he uses that shovel to stir up a big pot of rice every day for the meals. So, hey, there's somebody there eating pizza. You're making me hungry. Are you going to share? Oh, no, she's turned off. I scared her away. So it's really quite interesting. When we look at what programs they do, so they've got a computer-assisted literacy program to help people with their reading and their math skills in addition to the computer skills. And here's another very unique thing that the Rotarians come up with. So they have professional social workers and psychologists at the prison, but they don't put them in offices where a prisoner has to go and be embarrassed to knock on the door. This fellow is actually, he's in the computer room, but his primary job is not teaching computer literacy. His primary job is that he's a psychologist, and he rubs shoulders with the inmates on an informal basis. And so he, each day, is actually giving psychological reinforcement and motivation and treatment to the inmates. The computer environment is only his kind of facade for rubbing shoulders with the prisoner. So of course he teaches them computer skills, but his primary purpose is to use psychological motivation and treatment with them. And I thought that was quite a unique idea. So prisoners don't even know he's a psychologist. They're not embarrassed to talk to him from the other inmates. And so here's a case of some of the work that he has done with them, and talk about the criminal thinking concept. And on the left is some of the negative things they might say to themselves, and on the right is some of the stuff that hopefully they can get some positive thinking going on in their brain. Again, whenever the inmates go from one area to the other, they're always subject to a strict strip search, and just to make sure there's no contraband coming or going from anywhere. This one was kind of funny. This is the segregated confinement area. And so we were walking by there, and so there was two guys inside there, and they yell out at us, hey, can you get us out of here? Hey, come and help us get out of here. And the warden was there, and he says, guys, he says, I think if you're in there, you must have done something wrong. Maybe we'll see about it tomorrow. And it was kind of funny just how the response went there. All of the maintenance and the repairs are done by the inmates who have those skills. These fellows were repainting this particular wing of the building. This is going into one of the training centers, and we're walking into where they're taught some of their classes. And they put on a little program for us while we were there. I must say that all of the inmates were very polite. They were very kind in the way they greeted us. At no time did we feel threatened at all. They were totally respectful of us, and in fact showed appreciation for us coming to visit them. We were likely the most exciting thing that's happened to them in the last month, just being there. Any comments or questions? This is another shot of a little program they put on for us. They have a program called Journey to Freedom, and it's an 8-week program that helps them focus on changing their life, get involved in what they teach them about change and the process of change, and there is some religious basis of this in a non-denominational way. Another indication of what they do in terms of their thinking and how they try and give positive reinforcement, and about dealing with people, and how to solve problems or frustrations, and these are up in many of the rooms. Another thing they do is, for those who are good, they are allowed to come out into the yard, and they promote gardening. They encourage the inmates to do gardening. Apparently that's a good therapy they've found. And so not only does it feed the kitchen requirements, but it also gives the a good stress relief to the inmates. They've got sports facilities there. And if you're on good behavior, then you can get out for exercise into the fresh air. I'll talk more on that later. Interesting that the warden has motivational sessions with the inmates. So he'll bring in a group like this to the boardroom, and he'll have an hour or two session with them and try and get them inspired and motivated to think differently and do differently and aspire to achieve something to position them well for when they leave. And this is one of the signs that I thought, you know what? I wish all our teenage kids would have this branded on their forehead. You know, we all made stupid decisions when we were younger, and we all blamed the circumstances for something that went wrong or something that broke or got damaged. And this one stuck out at me when I saw it, that we really are a product of our decisions, and sometimes we don't make good decisions, so we don't have good circumstances. By the way, they also have their own little radio station. There's a lot of skills development projects here. This is one of them. The way they communicate in the prison is they have their own radio station. They play music. They give their announcements at certain times every day. They know, like at 2 p.m. are the announcements for the day, what's happening. They've got groups that are meeting, so they announce there's a group forming at this time or that time. The fellow in the background on the right is on air now. He's an inmate. The lady on the left is one of the staff members who coordinates the operation of the radio station, and she's also involved there. It's just an amazing experience for those people to be involved in that. What did I do? Okay, some of the they've got a lot of industries and skills development programs in this environment, and the inmates can find many different topics, many different work areas to improve their skills. They've got a carpentry shop, and there are some of the inmates there who are good at wood carving, and this young man makes wood carvings. And in the front of the shop, they've got a little gift shop, which is outside the prison proper. And so those items go in the prison gift shop, and people can stop as they're driving by and go in and pick up gifts. And then part of that funding goes back to the inmate. This is the carpentry shop inside where we just saw my wife Grace and the person doing the carvings. And you'll see in addition to teaching carpentry skills, you'll see the frame there of a door. And so what they do is they make those doors, like I showed you on the warden's or the CEO's office door. And they also make coffins for funeral parlors. And so they use the skills of both the carpentry and the wood carvers to make these carved doors and funeral caskets, and they sell those out on the open market. And those funds are used to help fund the costs and the operating expenses of the carpentry shop. And I should also share that the inmates who do the work are paid a small stipend for their efforts. 50% of that money is kept in a savings account so that when they're released from prison, they have a little bit of pocket money to leave with. The other 50% they have access to use at the local tuck shop or the little convenience store in the prison. So they can buy things, or they can send the money back home to their families if they choose. So some neat ideas, I think. Any questions at this point? Comments? Now, another thing that they do is if you were to go back to the city, and this is a poor district in the city of Belize, how many of you are familiar with Habitat for Humanity? Yeah, so I see some hands going up. So they have a similar program there called Cozy Homes. And so what they do is they contract the carpentry shop at the prison, Rotary does, to build these homes prefab. And so they go out and they load the walls units and the roof units on a trailer, and then they bring them out, and they're a little a 2-bedroom cozy home, much like Habitat for Humanity, only they don't need the foundations that we do, obviously. And in a day, they can assemble one of these homes. They put the windows in and the doors, and in some cases paint it. But these little houses are made on a prefab basis in the carpentry shop at the prison. Just an amazing concept. And this happens to be the Consul General for France, who's also the local president of the local Rotary Club. On to the sewing room. They have a sewing shop there, and they teach inmates how to sew so they can gain some life skills. Would you believe they sew all of their own orange jumpsuits for the prisoners, and they also sew all their own uniforms for the guards. So they're self-sufficient that way. By the way, I forgot to say that the carpentry shop makes all of the furniture requirements for the prison. So how they got from 900 inmates sleeping in 300 beds to 1,275 inmates sleeping in 1,275 beds is because of the work of the people in the carpentry shop. It's just an amazing thing that they're so self-sufficient. They've even got a little small cement block building plant there that they make all their own cement blocks. Meanwhile, as you're walking around the facility, you never want to lose sight of the fact that you are in a prison. We're not in a summer camp here. It is a prison, and there's many towers like this with guards looking down on you with sniper guns. So at no time do you feel, or did we feel, insecure or unsafe, but you're always reminded by these towers that you are in a prison. This is part of their farming operation where they grow crops and bring them in to supply the kitchen. Here's another one of their gardens that the inmates just voluntarily come out and grow the gardens, and they spend as much or as little time each day as they wish. It's also a therapy for social interaction and try and teach them to communicate and interact in a more socially acceptable environment. In the farming operation, in addition to food and crops, they've got a chicken operation. They've got a hog operation. They teach the inmates proper animal husbandry, how to take care of the animals. And so if you've got animals there, what do you need? You need a slaughterhouse. And they've even got a small slaughterhouse that they slaughter all of their own animals who are brought up on the farm, and they, of course, end up in the kitchen. Any questions or thoughts or comments?
One comment, Doug. I thought you were going to show some slaughterhouse pictures, and I was just preparing myself, but thank you for not.
No, actually, I won't show you any slaughterhouse pictures. The other interesting thing is that the guards have an advisory committee that meet, I think it's bi-monthly, with the warden and a couple of the senior leaders of the prison. And so they listen to concerns that the inmates may have. It's interesting that the inmates don't represent the inmates in the cells where they're housed. They on purpose represent another group of inmates so that there's no undue peer pressure or influence or arm twisting to those people by their fellow cellmates in their wing. So while they do represent the interests of the inmates, they usually represent another block where they don't reside. Now, this is an interesting concept. The behavior of the inmates is measured by points. And so whether you get out to work in the garden or get out to play basketball or you go to these programs, often is determined by your points, your demerit points. So if you're on good behavior, then the points allow you to get rewarded by being involved in these positive activities. So when it comes time for visiting, you don't have visiting like we would see on a television show where somebody comes into a room on one side and somebody comes on the other and there's a screen or a glass in between. The visiting here is like a family picnic. And if you've earned points through your good behavior, then your family can come. And the environment is that it's almost like a family picnic. They can come for an hour, they can come for 3 hours, they can come all day if they want to. There's no limit on how long they stay, and you can interact with them in a very loving and caring way. And that idea has done great things to enhance the behavior of the inmates, because that's their reward. And what better reward can you have than getting to interact with your family members? So I think that's a genius idea for operating a prison. That, well, a lot of these ideas are great ideas, and we got to start spreading the word in Canada to maybe take advantage of that. And they've already had 5 different countries, prison authorities from 5 different countries come and visit the center to learn how they're doing and how they're being so successful. In every one of the measurement categories that they use in a prison, the results are astoundingly positive. Like I'm talking, 46 to 58% improvement, or in some cases, if you want it to go down, it goes down. So the warden showed us all of their key result areas that they measure, and in every single category, it was enormously successful, and at least average of half or more improvement. So just amazing what they're doing there. This is a photo of some of the Rotarians. The fellow on the left with the white hair is a past governor friend of mine. The lady is president of Belize Club. My wife, Grace, is president of our club this year. The warden, myself, and then Rene, one of the boards of directors. So as I said, the prison has a lot of positive quotes in mural format. Many of them are Nelson Mandela, and they really, really are trying to use this as a way to get better thinking going on in the brains of these people. And a lot of this goes back to the Dale Carnegie type of training, that you emphasize the positive and downplay the negative. So I guess that's the end of what I have prepared, and I'm pleased to enter into any discussions about the prison or anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. I had a question.
Yeah.
How long is it that the prison's been running this way as opposed to how it was before? I don't remember if you mentioned that.
I didn't mention that. Rotarians have been there about 12 years, I believe, or maybe 14.
Okay. So in that time, have you seen, like, I know you're saying that in rates, everything's gotten a lot better, but have you looked, or have they looked particularly into like how well inmates adjust once they get back to their real life, and like rates of recidivism and stuff like that? Sorry.
Yeah, they've. It's hard for them to track when the inmate leaves how well they've done, but in terms of the return offenders, they're way down.
Okay.
But I'll tell you the opportunity that Rotary has, and we had a meeting about it. They've asked me to assist them with this. And that is, they spend a lot of time and energy on teaching them skills, life skills, but when they go out, it's hard for any criminal, wherever you are, to get employment, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Some of them have a little bit of money that they've saved up through their little stipend savings account. So what the Rotarians there are hoping to do in the next 2 or 3 years is they would go maybe 100 or 200 miles away, far enough away that it's not near the prison, and they would start up some form of a little cooperative type venture, similar to the way the prison is run, that they might have a building where they would rent out a stall to a carpenter, they might rent out a space to a plumber, they might rent out a space to someone who wants to run a little sewing business, and then we would have a little microcredit project there where we would loan them $100 or $200 to buy their equipment, and then they could go into business for themselves. You might have a common area, kind of like what we do for new entrepreneurs in some communities, where there's one building and each of them has their own little stall or their own little office, but there's one common room where they can have meetings, one common office area where they can use the computer or use a photocopy machine without each of them having to buy one.
Right.
And really kind of an entrepreneurial coaching and mentoring and microcredit program. So that's what they're hoping to develop as the next step in this, to to be a one step away from the prison to help these people, get some coaching and mentoring to run their own little entrepreneurial enterprise, and have some backup resources and possibly some microcredit financing. So that's what they're hoping to do over the next year or two.
All right, yeah, that sounds like it's a really good way to go about doing things, from what I'm saying. Sounds better than what we have in Canada right now, honestly.
Yes.
So
I think each of us, if we do anything as a result of me doing this tonight, my challenge to you would be to make it a point to talk to government officials, talk to your members of parliament, write a letter to the Secretary General or the Attorney General and say, hey, I've heard they're doing really great things in Belize Central Prison. I saw a report on it the other night. I think this is something worthy of your attention to investigate, because there's a lot of good stuff going on here. And if the little country of Belize can do it with the Rotarians, why can't we do it in Ontario and do it in Canada? Because as a RCMP officer, I mean, I've been in some of those prisons. That's, you know what, I wouldn't put my worst enemy in there if I could avoid it.
So Doug, I have a comment and also a question that you may have said, but I want to ask it anyway. I just think, first of all, that it's amazing, certainly that, when you even look at our prison systems, there's so many people that are there because of mental health and addictions. And sometimes, and I did a little bit of work at one point, my gosh, sometimes if it was something minor going in, they sure learned some
bad tricks coming out, yeah.
And so what I really appreciate about this is they've taken sort of that whole body approach, and even just the giving back. So to be able to participate in those houses to help somebody else in their community who's in need, I think that's amazing. And then to even take it a step further, once they're out, to do the microfunds, so they've learned these new skills, and now you've got a warden who's inspiring and motivational, and they've set everything up for success, and now they've given those funds after. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
The question to you is, and again, you might have answered this, I apologize, but so is Rotary continuing to fund this, or is there government funding, or kind of how does that funding and even moving forward? Okay,
so Rotary's goal is to have this operation run on a self-sustaining financial plan. I believe at the time when it started, Rotary put some funding into it, but how it's set up now is in addition to, and that's one reason why they connected with the Kolb Foundation, because they can receive donations and contributions, and people can be issued tax receipts. So I don't believe Rotary's putting much money into it now. They're putting more sweat equity and management and governance into it. And they've really worked hard at the self-sustainability. Like they don't pay a nickel for furniture because they buy the raw lumber and have the carpentry shop make it. They don't have any expenses for guards' uniforms or the blue jumpsuits for the inmates because they buy the material and they make it. Because of their ability, and they've got this set up as an NGO foundation, people can donate funds to this, and some would sponsor, say, the Alcoholics Anonymous program. You could choose to fund a donation to that program, or to the Criminal Thinking program, or to the drugs program. So I think they did touch on this, that by setting it up as an NGO with a foundation, they are allowed to take financial donations and issue tax receipts. And then they do generate, I think, a lot of money on those carved office doors, which are upscale doors for any executive office, and the funeral coffins. So they're always trying to generate funding to pay the costs in a self-sustaining way.
Well, and it's interesting because if you look at one of the issues with Canada and the cost of running a prison, I mean, this is an amazing solution for them.
Yep. Now, I do believe they also they have a formal management contract. Rotary has a formal management contract with the Belize Federal Government. So the government is putting money into this, which Rotary manages. But we didn't get into the details of the budget. But I got the impression that the amount that the government has put in is much less than what they normally would have been putting in previously to Rotary.
Hi, Doug. Got a question about how that was a huge increase of inmates in the prison. Did they build all the beds, like bunk bed style, or how did they manage such an increase of inmates?
Well, I guess more people doing things wrong, but I mean, that's been over, 12 to 14 years. So, it's just growing. I would say based on what the warden presented to us, if memory serves me correctly, at least a third of those inmates are what they call low offenders. And when I asked them, what do you mean by low offender? It was someone who was caught sneaking across the border in the middle of the night from Honduras because he thought he'd have a better life in Belize. So most of those people, low offenders, meaning that they're not dangerous. They haven't robbed anybody. There's been no violence involved. They just got caught on the wrong side of the law, so they're not really bad people. They just got caught doing a bad thing.
I see.
Anybody else?
I'll just make a comment, Doug. As I'm kind of watching this whole thing unfold, I'm like, what an innovative way to approach, a system. It's like a systems approach where they're self-sufficient. They're learning all kinds of life skills. They're able to be hopefully productive, people in society after going through that. And I there's a level of engagement there that I don't think I've seen in most businesses. Never mind.
Yeah, it's totally a level of engagement, and they're energizing the people from within, and there's an enormous, like, even just talking to some of them, like if you've become one of the chefs in the kitchen, or you're the baker who made those buns, like we talked to the one fellow there, and you could just see his chest swelling with pride that he actually was the guy who made those rolls, or you could see those, the two that were giving the needle to the little pig. We talked with them for a few minutes, and he was telling us all about the pigs and the health of the pigs and why they were inoculating the pigs. And you could just tell that he was a somebody when he was doing that. He wasn't a low-life street bum, and it's just elevating them psychologically and inspiring and motivating them from every direction.
It's probably something they've never had in their life.
No.
Possibly up until that point. So, yeah. Very fascinating. I love the innovation of that.
Olivia, did you have a question?
Hey.
She's busy eating pizza.
I wish. I heard you talk about how we're able to donate to the AA initiatives that are inside of the prison, but I was just wondering if there's been any sort of increase in programming for inmates with addictions, or any access to healthcare or psychologists, because I know a lot of the time in Canada, a lot of the inmates that we have here, they only have access to doctors over webcam, which is inhumane to say the least. So I was wondering if Rotary has been involved with sort of that aspect.
Yes, there's healthcare. I'm not sure that it's available on site, but I think there's healthcare, like I think 2 or 3 days a week. The psychologists are there full time as part of their job, and we met a couple of them. One of them was the fellow in the computer room that he's a psychologist first and a computer teacher second. So his main responsibility is to give mental counseling to those who need it. And a lot of times he's talking to them and he's giving it to them, and they don't even realize what's happening.
Okay, cool. Thanks for your answer. I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to increase the amount of beds that are in the prisons. That's an amazing feat all by itself. So thanks for your time.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't actually do any of this. I'm just reporting on it.
Well, I appreciate the effort either way.
One question, Doug, did you go to Belize specifically to visit the prison, or was it something that you found out as you were?
Well, actually, I'll try not to make this too long, but this all started, I was actually in Belize, Mexico twice, and Honduras as well on the same trip. This all started by a governor friend, the incoming governor, who asked for my help to plan a district conference on a cruise ship. And because he had heard that back when I was governor, I planned, we didn't have it as a conference, but we had a cruise. And on each port of call on the cruise, we did service projects when we went ashore. So he had heard a lot of very positive talk about that. And so when he got nominated as governor, he called me and said, hey, would you help me do something? Because I know you've already done it. And by what I heard, it was very successful. So I was supposed to go to UN meetings in Geneva. And to be honest with you, I was getting frustrated. And I promised my wife that maybe we could do a river cruise the week prior to the UN meeting in Geneva. And I wasn't happy with how the feedback was coming. So just on the heels of this governor calling me about this other cruise, I just hang on, I'm going to cough. Pardon me. So anyway, I finally, in frustration, said, you know what, I'm not going to go all the way over to Geneva when I'm not comfortable with what the arrangements are, and seem to be kept in the dark. And so I said, we can go maybe on a cruise in the Caribbean or somewhere. So then I talked to this governor, and then I found, okay, there is a cruise going to these countries. I'm going to go on that cruise. And I put the word out to all my contacts in Central America. And, you know, within like less than 24 hours, I had many contacts. Come here, come here, come here. And of course, I had to go where the cruise boat took me, but one of them was Belize. And so the idea of me going to these countries, we went to tour many projects in the other countries as well, was to prepare, do a dry run, if you will, for the district conference group that may end up going there down the road next year. And so I was just kind of laying the groundwork for that to happen. So that's kind of how we ended up getting to Belize. But in hindsight, what I think will happen, we're going to still have the cruise, but I think Belize has got enough that one day wouldn't be enough. Just being in port one day wouldn't be enough. And one of the board of directors, who's a Rotarian, is the manager of the Radisson Hotel. He'll give us a good deal on housing. We might even take a group there for a week. In addition to the cruise, we'll have a mission trip there for a week. You can get a direct flight out of Miami, very cheap. And so that's potentially what may happen.
Oh, that's great. You may have a few additions to your team.
Well, send me an email if you want, dougv@dougvincent.com, and everybody's welcome. And then, by the way, the governor's already told me I can have friends or relatives or colleagues come on the cruise next year if they want to. He's more than happy to have guests from outside his district. Actually, it might even be in your district.
Very cool. Well, Doug, it's just about 8 o'clock, so I'd like to honor the time that we've committed to this. And I have to say, you have probably used our time together most effectively and efficiently, because we're right on time. And I feel like we got this wealth of information and knowledge and perspective of what prison life can be like and how it can really truly contribute to a more productive society. And and give people a sense of hope in a place where there probably would never be hope in any way. So it was really, truly inspiring. And I'm kind of, I'm a little bit, I guess, surprised that Rotary would be part of a prison project. But when I see this project, it makes complete and total sense that Rotary would be involved in something like this. So thank you so much for sharing this with us, for giving us some innovative insight into how, producing a system that, is open and caring enough to give people a second chance can really, truly change their lives. And this was a really great example of that. Thank you.
My pleasure. Pleased to share.
And thank you very much to Lori for bringing Doug to us tonight. And thank you so much for all the Rylarians who joined us tonight. It was great to have you with us and to bring you into part of our online world. And
Doug, I want to thank you. That was the most enjoyable trip I've had from King City all the way down to just outside of Hamilton.
You're in my neighborhood, Brian.
Yeah. Here I thought you stopped off somewhere for coffee.